Hey y'all, Scott here.
The Scott Pilgrim comic book series was written by Canadian author Brian O'Malley. The comic was inspired by O'Malley listening to a song called Scott Pilgrim by the Canadian band Plumtree. The comic went on for 6 volumes, originally being printed in black and white, but later receiving colored versions. The way I'm gonna tackle Scott Pilgrim is that I'm gonna give each volume its own mini review where I discuss my favorite moments, character bits, and some problems that may pop up. So, without further ado, let me tell you the story of how Scott Pilgrim learned not to be a prick.
Volume 1. Precious Little Life.
Precious Little Life is a great beginning, but I can see why some people may be turned off by it if they don't know where the story is going, since Scott is not only dating a high schooler named Knives Chow at the age of 24, but he also ditches her for some hot chick he weirdly stalks. Yes, these are disgusting things our protagonist does, but here's the thing. That's the point. I know that's a no-dud genius moment to fans and anyone with an English degree, but I've seen so many people missing the point that Scott is supposed to start off as a mediocre person and get better throughout the story. Mini rant aside, this volume is a funny slice of life story with flawed yet likable characters. I think the reason I like Scott so much outside of his character arc throughout the series is that he's an endearing mix of an overly confident jerk and an adorable doofus. Scott Pilgrim also has a really good supporting cast, like the coolest man alive, Wallace Wells, the always stressed out Stephen Stills, Scott's band biggest fan and consistent punchline, Young Neil, and the constantly annoyed Kim Pine, who was actually an inspiration for one of my own characters, hint hint wink wink, watch Veilbusters please. Most of the volume revolves around Scott attempting to date Ramona Flowers while preparing for the Battle of the Bands, and he manages to do so! Oh wait, he doesn't, because Ramona has 7 evil exes who Scott must beat up in order to fully date the girl. When this revelation comes near the end of this volume, the series starts blending in its chill, coming-of-age storyline with action-packed battles combining video games and manga references. The first of the 7, Matthew Patel, doesn't get much of a chance to shine since he's introduced and taken out in the last third of the volume, but he's an entertaining loser for the time we do see him in.
Volume 2. Versus the World.
Versus the World is the second volume of the series, and why is everything suddenly animated now? The first chapter of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was adapted into an animation by the studio Titmouse for Adult Swim to promote the release of the upcoming feature film. It's a really cool short, and I wouldn't mind seeing an animated series of Scott Pilgrim by Titmouse in this style. Back to the comic, Scott breaks up with Knives so he can be with Ramona while preparing to fight the second evil ex, Lucas Lee, a famous movie star. Scott eventually confronts Lucas Lee and doesn't so much beat him up, but more so tricks him into hurting himself really badly. While Lucas has less screen time than Matthew, I find Lucas more memorable because of how this volume built up to his confrontation, along with how funny that confrontation ends up being, especially with how Lucas is defeated. But that's not the end of Versus the World, as Knives goes on a quick rage attack against Ramona for quote-unquote stealing Scott, and an old friend from Scott's college years returns, which leads to...
Volume 3. The Infinite Sadness.
Apparently, one of Scott's exes, Envy Adams, and Ramona's third evil ex, Todd Ingram, are dating and are hell-bent to destroy both of them. Also, Todd has psychic powers thanks to his vegan diet, because funny ha-has. Todd is a fine, jerkish antagonist for this volume, but this is probably my least favorite of the evil exes. I find what happens to him more entertaining than his actual personality. The story of him being a psychic vegan is interesting, but not him as a person. Around this volume, I start to make an observation of this series, which may be completely false, but hear me out. I think all of the 7 evil exes are a dark parallel to Scott in some way. If Scott was even more of a jerk than he already is, he would probably end up like one of these 7 guys. Thankfully, Scott isn't like that, as this volume truly starts his road to self-improvement by confronting his past with Ebony and start to make amends with Knives after breaking her heart. And this road to self-improvement would continue in the accurately named
Volume 4. Gets It Together.
Gets It Together is packed with interesting stories and developments for the cast. Lisa Miller from Scott's past comes to visit, and Scott manages to keep his womanizing urges in control to not cheat on Ramona along with moving in with her. Scott also gets a job to pay off his rent instead of having others pay his rent for him, and manages to impress Knives' katana-wielding dad by defeating the 4th evil ex, Roxy, an angry loudmouth who's clearly a fan of that Shonen Jump series about the ninjas. Gets It Together might be my favorite volume of the series, since it mixes the relatable slice-of-life stories of the entire cast, Scott's self-improvement arc, and the surrealist video game-esque reality of this world into one entertaining package. I would also like to bring up O'Malley's stellar art style for the series. It takes influences from manga, yet manages to be distinct but very appealing to look at, especially in color, though it's not that bad in black and white. But you know what is bad? Scott Pilgrim's life in this next volume.
Volume 5. Versus the Universe.
Versus the Universe is one of the best all is lost moments I've experienced in fiction, and for a simple reason. Scott had this all coming. Ramona finding out that Scott cheated on Knives and later leaving him is a natural consequence for what he did. It's sad and depressing, yes, especially when Scott was just improving himself, but in the story, it makes sense. The two evil ex-twin brothers don't get much focus in this volume, but I fully understand why, as the All Is Lost story is very important. Scott also experienced many other consequences in this volume, but I'll let you find those out for yourself.
Volume 6. Finest Hour.
Despite this volume being called Finest Hour, it takes a while for said Finest Hour to come, since all of Scott's character progression has been lost, and is now a sad, lazy, and somewhat gross husk of himself. After a bunch of scenes of Scott being a loser, and another scene I'll get to in a bit, Scott faces down Gideon, that final of Ramona's evil exes, and for the big villain we've been building up to for the last 5 volumes, he does not disappoint. This dude is an evil guy through and through, with practically no redeeming qualities as a person, and I love villains like that who I'm supposed to hate with a passion, so Gideon is right up my alley. I'm not going to talk about the final battle because all I can say boils down to it's awesome and makes me feel things, along with completing everyone's character arc in a satisfying way, but I do want to focus on a specific scene from earlier that really hit me hard emotionally. Scott is walking with Kim, still broken, but after an argument between the two, it's revealed at the beginning of Volume 2, aka the chapter adapted for the animation, was Scott making an excuse for his terrible actions. In actuality, Simon, the kid who kidnapped Kim, was Kim's boyfriend, and Scott beat him up and took Kim with him. After this revelation, the evil Scott appears, and Scott fights him, thinking beating him will solve all his problems, but Kim yells at Scott, saying that he can't keep forgetting his mistakes or else he's doomed to repeat them. After a flash of memories of the good times he had with Ramona, both Scotts stand still with defeated expressions on their face. They merge together, and Scott remembers and takes responsibility for all the mistakes and bad deeds he's done. About to get a little real for a second. As someone who makes mistakes out of idiocy, misinformation, and at times malice, it was kind of comforting to know that I'm not alone and that I can change for the better. And that's what the series is ultimately about. It's about understanding your flaws and improving yourself. And it's all told through the accessible lens of comedy, gaming, music, anime, and feel-good vibes. It's one of my favorite series of all time for a reason, and I'd highly recommend reading it, especially since I left off a lot of cool moments for you to experience for yourself.